Hello, I'm Amelia Brunskill, one of the librarians here at UIC. This recording is about PICO and search strategy.
In this session, I'm going to be talking about how to define your research question using PICO and talking about search strategy, and then specifically what synonyms and related terms are and how they might be used, how you might use truncation, what controlled vocabulary and subject headings are and how you can find them, and how you can build a search string.
PICO is a common approach to defining/constructing a clinical research question.
So PICO is an acronym. So the P stands for patient, population, or problem. So this is important attributes of the patient's population or problem, which could include age or health condition. Intervention, which what intervention might have be used or being used, such as using a particular drug or surgery. C is for comparison. So if there's a potential alternative to the intervention that you're interested in, such instead of using the drug, using a surgery, this won't always be applicable, but sometimes it will be. And then outcome or outcomes, the outcome of interest for the intervention. So for example, does the surgery or drug result in lower blood pressure, weight loss, improved affect, etc. So here's an example. So here's a clinical research question that involves the elements of PICO. So in elderly patients, what is the effectiveness of continuous passive motion therapy, CPM therapy, following knee replacement and achieving optimal range of motion? So the patient population or problem is elderly patients with knee replacements. And you'll notice that here there's more than one keyword or part of the patient, and that's common. You often have maybe more than one attribute of the patient that is of interest. Intervention here is the CPM therapy. The comparison isn't really listed. It's probably often going to just be sort of the lack of that something. So it doesn't necessarily need to be specified. And then the outcome here is the optimal range of motion. You're hoping that this therapy might improve the optimal range of motion for these elderly patients who have received a knee replacement. So that's the PICO breakdown for this question. So why use PICO? One, it can be helpful to think out your question. If you can't identify at least 3 PICO components, your question may be too broad. You may not have thought about one of these aspects, sort of the outcome, or enough about the patients or the intervention of interest. It can also help approach how you approach your literature search. I should say, however, your search may ultimately not use all parts of your PICO question, especially if it's very specific, since there may be limited or no research that perfectly addresses all of it. There may be, if you're looking at something that has been commonly studied, you may be able to find multiple studies. It will just depend. So now I want to talk about search strategy. So there's 2 common issues when it comes to search strategy. Either your search finds too much, and I tend to think of this often as a positive thing, though not always. But if you find too much, then you can filter. So you can look at a lot of databases will have options in terms of filtering it by date, by article type, by subject, ways that you can take the larger initial set of records and get it smaller. You can also be more specific, so you can add search terms potentially, or use other filters. So you could say, oh, okay, like I am also particularly interested in a certain age group or in a certain area, so maybe I can add terms relating to that to narrow it down. And you can also be more picky about sort of like, okay, there's a lot of results, which are the best matches. And this is just a small note. Sometimes you want to check that the sort that a database is using is by relevance, not publication date, especially if you're getting a lot of results and the first ones look like they're really recent, but they're not really quite on target. So I often find that if your search finds too much, it's a little bit easier to deal with because you have all these options for winnowing it down. Whereas if your search finds too little, it's often unclear how is that all, are you being too specific? You know, is there just not much research in this area? Or are you not using the right words to bring back relevant results? And especially if you get very few to no results, it's really hard sometimes figuring out like, okay, how do I back out and get more results? So I'm going to be focusing a little bit more on techniques that help you when you to avoid this case of just not finding much at all. So for this, we're going to use the sample topic. So is resistance training more effective than wearing knee braces to reduce pain caused by patellar tendonitis in female volleyball players? So if we do the split for PICO, this is what it looks like. So for the P, we have female volleyball players with patellar tendinosis. I is resistance training. The C is knee braces. O is a reduction of pain. So what happens if you put all of these into a search? And you'll notice, you know, female volleyball players were quite specific in some of our different aspects. But, you know, this, we could go into PubMed, we can put in resistance training, knee braces, reduce pain, patellar tendinosis, female volleyball players, all these different potential keywords from here, and then we get 0 results. So, which, you know, it's hard to know, like, is there nothing that's out there or what's went wrong in the search process? So how can you potentially get more results? So one thing I often do, especially when, you know, you have 0 results at the beginning, sort of pare down the number of concepts that you are searching for, knowing that you can always go back and add in more if you begin having more success. So I would just say for this, potentially you could say, okay, resistance training and patellar tendinosis. I'm really interested in this condition and this one approach. Is this helpful? That's what I'm really interested in. And then you can also, other options that you can do, in addition to or instead of paring down the concepts, is you can identify potential synonyms and related terms for your search terms / concepts. So, okay, are there other ways of saying, you know, resistance training? Are there other words that people might use to express the idea of patellar tendinosis? Or are these the only ones that are available? Also allowing for variance using truncation when appropriate. I'm going to be explaining what that means in a minute if you're not familiar with it. And looking for relevant controlled vocabulary / subject headings that you can include with your search. Okay, so we're going to go through these one by one. So the first one is synonyms / related terms. So some medical conditions and some concepts generally, but sometimes there's just really one term that everybody uses. But often there can be a variety. So even with medical conditions, you'll see we have all these different potential variants for the same term. And some of them, like jumper's knee, is very colloquial, might not be as common to use in the medical literature. But, you know, the other ones, it's not necessarily clear which one any one particular author would choose to use.
So how do you find synonyms? You can brainstorm. Sometimes you may just be aware of potential different synonyms for a term. Sometimes you may instead want to look at a thesaurus or a reference tool, which might give some other suggestions. You can also skim for relevant articles for additional synonyms to see what words other authors use. Don't worry if you can't think of many at first or find many at first. The process can really be iterative, and often you find more the more you come across different articles and see what terms different authors use. So what might related terms look like? So these could be terms closely associated with the concept / term of interest. For example, if you're interested in finding information on teenagers, you might also include the term high school, since that's an environment where many of them will be found. If you're interested in ideas around fall or fall risk, you might also include the term balance. Related terms could be also potentially narrower or broader versions of the term, such as concepts of interest, such as a specific form of resistance training, or if you're struggling to find content, you can go broader and simply look at exercise writ large rather than the specific form of resistance training.
Truncation. So what truncation does is it allows you to broaden a search to include various word endings. This can be very helpful in the case of plurals or terms that have a lot of different slight variations. To do a search using truncation, you enter the root of a word and then a truncation symbol, which is usually an asterisk, at the end. Some examples. Here we have adolescent. If you put the asterisk at the end of it, most databases will bring back adolescent, adolescents, and adolescents. Here, with a therapy example, this will bring back therapy, therapist, therapists, and therapies. Sometimes you'll find that you won't want to use truncation because it brings back too many different variations, including things you're not interested in. But it's a useful thing to be aware of.
Quotation marks. If you want to search a phrase and keep the words together, you'll want to put quotation marks around them, just in these examples: resistance exercise, heart attack, or physical therapy. Most databases will understand that this means that you want these two words searched as a single phrase rather than bringing back all items that contain both the words that are in the phrase.
Controlled vocabulary. Controlled vocabulary is standardized terminology that is applied across publications within a database. For example, in a database, they might use myocardial infarction as a controlled vocabulary term that they use instead of heart attacks. So any publication that is about heart attacks, whether or not they use the term myocardial infarction or heart attacks, the databases would use myocardial infarction and apply it to that article. So basically, they've indexed or tagged these controlled vocabulary terms that will help users find relevant content. Often, controlled vocabulary terms are referred to as subject headings, and they may present as links that can be clicked on to find other publications that would be tagged with that same term.
So some quick FAQ about controlled vocabulary. Do all databases use controlled vocabulary? No, many do, but not all. Do you have to use controlled vocabulary terms in your search? No, but sometimes it can be very helpful, and it's just good to understand what they are and be able to know how to look for them and use them when you want them. Will databases automatically map your keywords to controlled vocabulary terms? So it means, like, could you just put in heart attack and it would just know to bring back up something on that was tagged only with myocardial infarctions? Sometimes some databases, again, are able to do that, but it won't always necessarily recognize the correct match. If what the term you're using is quite dissimilar than the one it's using, it may not be able to make that connection.
We're going to look at an example of controlled vocabulary within PubMed. PubMed uses what's called MESH, medical subject headings. And from the main PubMed page, you can see this link to a MESH database. So we're going to go ahead and click on that. And this gets you to a place where we can search to see what terms they are using as subject headings. For example, we'll use the ones we looked at before, heart attack. And we'll see that what this maps to, as I had mentioned, is instead myocardial infarction. You'll see there's different subheadings that you could also apply with that indexers have used. You can restrict to articles that use this as one of the handful of major topics applied to an article, so we're saying what it's primarily about. You can see all these entry terms, which could also potentially be synonyms. These are all terms that have been mapped to this chosen term of myocardial infarction. So you'll see heart attack, heart attacks, myocardial infarct, cardiovascular strokes, all of these mapping to this one single term. And you can also see where it falls in the hierarchy. So these are broader terms above it, and these are narrower terms underneath it. So you could either make it more specific if you wanted to, or you could broaden it out. So if you want to add this, I'm just going to delete that. If you want to add it to search, you click on the Add to Search Builder, and you'll see myocardial infarction in quotation marks, and then with this mesh in brackets. And that's what it's, when you hit the search PubMed, it'll only bring back articles that have been specifically indexed with that subject headings. So of course, there's a lot on heart attack, so we get a lot of results. So another example is going to do resistance training. And so in this case, the term that we use is the same term that they use. So we see, okay, that is the right term to use here, and get some information about it. And then again, we can look at these entry terms for other potential synonyms or related terms. See like weightlifting, strengthening programs, weight bearing, all these different sort of related terms that we could look at. And again, we have the hierarchy down here. And if we wanted to add it to the search builder, we could do so there and then search PubMed for this specifically as a subject heading and get back all the items that have been tagged with it. So that's what mesh terms look like and how controlled vocabulary works in PubMed. In this next part, we're going to go over how you can take all of this that we've talked about and use it to create a search string.
So we're going to start with a Boolean refresher. The Boolean operators are or, and not. You can use some or all of these in your search string, so I'm going to go over what they do. Using or says that you want either of the terms, so articles that use either of those terms that you want to bring back. So it serves to expand your search. All of the things here that are in green would be brought back. So if you do diet or exercise, they'll bring back all of the articles that use the term diet and all the articles that bring back the term exercise. The Boolean and instead limits your search. So here, if you do diet and exercise, you're only going to bring back the articles that use both of those terms. So you only have that section in the middle in green where the two of those overlap. Not allows you to exclude things. So here we have diet, not exercise. So we get the items that use diet, but not the ones that use diet and exercise. So that excludes a little bit of content there. So how does this play out in terms of synonyms and variants, and then also concepts? Well, synonyms and variants should be OR'd together. So women or female, you're interested in things that use either of those terms. For concepts, you AND them together. So here you have women or female, and then we have kneecap or patella. And then to get just the stuff in between that captures both of those, we'd use AND. This rule will result in the search string you see below with women or female in parentheses, and then and in between, before, again in parentheses, kneecap or patella.
Okay, so now let's walk through an example search string. So a search string is what we would put into the search box for a database and run to do a search. So here's an example of a generic search string for publications looking at both resistance training and patellar tendinosis. So here we put together, and for phrases we use quotation marks, we put together resistance training or resistance exercise or strength training or bodybuilding or weightlifting, all in parentheses to say that we are interested in any one of those terms. And also any one of these terms. Again, we have the parentheses, patellar tendinopathy, or jumper's knee, or patellar tendinitis, or patellar tendinitis. Excuse me. And then this is what we would look like if we added a mesh term for a PubMed string. Is again, we have basically everything is the same, except here we've also put in resistance training, and then with that specific formatting that shows it's mesh. And we just OR it along and put it in here. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it gave you a good introduction to what PICO is and how to use it, and also to some of the basics of search strategy. My name is Amelia Brunskill, and please feel free to email me with any questions that you have at abrunks2@uic.edu.